Evening, everybody. My name is Tom Good. I'm the Vice President of GRAAA. Our President and Chief Mechanic, Chris Miller, is occupied tonight, so the pleasant task of welcoming you and handling a few housekeeping items before the program starts falls to me. And I've been asked to be brief, so I'll be fast. Tonight marks the beginning of our 2025 70th anniversary featured speaker series. All 5 of this year's speakers are GRAAA homeboys. And so more about tonight's speaker in a moment. The next speaker who will be here in this space, and you will not want to miss it, so put it on your calendars. Wednesday, April 30th, 7:00 p.m. here in the auditorium. Dr. Jake Borjali will bring us up to date on the current revolutions in our understanding of fundamental physics. Jake returns to GRAAA, the scene and cause of his wasted youth that has led him to the position he occupies today as an internationally recognized leading edge contributor in the field of theoretical physics. Not to be missed. Before that, on Saturday morning, April 5th, 10:30 a.m., again here at the museum, the 3rd and final installment of our Introduction to Astronomy classes will be held. This one will be telescope advice and tune-up clinic. So we'll help attendees get into the gritty nitty of tuning up and performing minor repairs on their personal telescopes, so they'll be ready for this year's season. We have a class coming up for people who are interested in and how to get started in what we used to call astrophotography, but now more generically we call astroimaging or digital imaging. This is a basics and options for beginners. There's a lot of interest in this now. So this is for people who want to learn how to get started, adding to the experience of observing the skill and craft how to create artifacts from your hobby. This class will be held on Saturday morning, May 10th, 10:30 a.m., with a repeat session the following Tuesday evening, May 10th, 7:30 p.m. Our next season of group visits to the Veen Observatory begins next week. Monday and Tuesday, we have a school group that's out there, and we're expecting more groups to be signing up. Those stalwart volunteers who have helped in the last few years as hosts and helpers for group visits, you'll be getting an alert soon about how to sign up and to match your generosity and skills with those church groups, school groups, families, couples, date night folks who like to come out and we can show off the observatory and our instruments. On Saturday evening, May 3rd, we will observe International Astronomy Day with our first public night of the season at the Veen Observatory, cloud cover conditions permitting, of course. For the full list of public nights and all the events that I've mentioned, and much, much more, go to our website, graaa.org, bookmark it, and you can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and sign up on our Discord server for last-minute information about pop-up events. Tonight's speaker, Dave DeBruyn. Dave first came to the museum right out of the University of Michigan in 1964 and soon became the lead curator for the Roger B. Chaffee Planetarium, a position that he held until his official nominal retirement in 2003. Since 1965 and continuing to date, he has authored a regular column on astronomy for the Grand Rapids Press at mlive.com. He's been a longtime leader in various positions of GRAAA, including president, always strengthening the collaboration between the organization and the museum, which has existed since our founding in 1955, 70 years ago. He's now concentrating on member services and relationships as chair of the membership committee. He provides a lot of services and keeps the organization going. I call him the Eminence Grise of the Astronomy Association. Please welcome Dave DeBruyn.
I have been described as many things over the years, but that's the first time His Eminence? Oh, whatever. It's just Dave. And I am so glad to be with you. And because I'm 84 years old, you'll excuse me if I have a prop or two when I'm now speaking to people. I know better than to perhaps trip off the edge of the stage in the middle of the presentation and then kind of spoil everything. We're going to be concentrating our attention on slides, visuals. I'm going to have to jump through them quite rapidly. And I want to remind you and myself that we're not going to spend a lot of extra time on small items, but we're going to try to stick to the main theme of 70 years of history. And I promise you, I'm going to try to get this formal part in 1 hour flat, and then we're going to leave about 20 minutes in which we will have a handheld microphone that we can pass around for other stories from some of the rest of you here. And so we're going to start out by explaining that I'm using a horrendously powerful pointer, far overkill, and I'm going to be very careful not to point it at you, but we're doing that because we are recording this for our YouTube channel. And on the YouTube channel, once again, we don't want people looking at me, we want them looking at the visuals. And there are some individuals that are going to pop up. Some of them are sitting right here in the room, and it's going to be really, really interesting to see, because we're going to put a light on them at some point, how much they have changed, just like myself. And so we begin at the beginning, in 1955. And it was in 1955 that James C. Veen, a name familiar to all of you, joined forces with two other individuals. Evelyn Grable, who was the head of children's activities at the Public Museum. Also, she was involved eventually in the first initial programming in the new planetarium. She had a long time interest in all kinds of science, but astronomy particularly. And so she was drawn to providing resources from the museum for this infant astronomy association. So she associated with Veen, and then there was a Helen Vonk, who remained somewhat enigmatic, simply because when I came in 1964, hardly anybody knew who she was. So I'm assuming even though she was an official co-founder, she was not around for very long. And the very first meeting was held on November 4th in 1955. And that's where the first enigma or kind of dichotomy comes up, because I'd always heard that the organization formed in May of 1955. Maybe it officially started then, but the first meeting was not until November 4th at the Public Museum, probably in the old auditorium in the original Jefferson Street building. There was a small lean-to auditorium there. And you'll notice that our program for the evening was a little bit on the non-secular side, when a preacher who was part of the organization was the first speaker. We will also discuss a meeting to be held on November 7th on telescope making. That was all the rage in the 50s and 60s, making your own telescope. And there are even people in this room that have done that. Annual dues, $2. They've gone up a little bit, but we've held them constant, I think, for at least 25 years now. They have not gone up. Some of the original characters in the organization, as you see here in the caption, I'm assuming this is from a newspaper article probably before 1958, because James C. Veen is in there right here. And one of the early leaders, a name that I think you've all heard, Raymond B. Larson, is back here. And then also a person who was absolutely legendary in this organization, Percy Hawkins, right in here. This could be Helen Vonk. because we don't have many pictures of her, we're not sure. And I believe this gentleman is Richard Bennett, who was another one of the early members of the governing board. Once again, the leaders of the organization. Now Donald Thompson, a name that also is well known, and actually the first person I actually collaborated with in the organization, has now become president. Here's Mr. Bennett and James C. Veen, who's now secretary. This is, as you can see, from 1957. So we've gone ahead a couple of years, and Veen did not serve in leadership, in the top leadership, very, very long. There was great support from the Astronomy Club for the museum and vice versa. Mary Jane Dockery, longtime lecturer in the schools for the museum. Maybe some of you from your childhood remember hearing her give lectures. She'd travel all around to schools in the area, lecturing on a wide variety of natural subjects. Quite the science specialist, particularly geology. Oftentimes we would call her in if we had a meteorite specimen that needed expert identification. And of course, most meteorites turned out to not be meteorites. And we had to judiciously tell the person that, including in this particular case, where there's this great big rock that has absolutely no resemblance whatsoever to a real meteorite. And then, of course, Percy Hawkins. And this is the interesting thing about this clipping. It is from 1959, and in 1959, we find out that Percy Hawkins had already been active in this hobby for almost 50 years. So we've got a gentleman here who's well into his 60s and who had been interested in astronomy since a very young age. And we also have a person of incredible talents and versatility. And now we are looking at a star party, early star party, 1960, held at the Lowell Fairgrounds. I believe our current president, Chris Miller, lives within a stone's throw of the Lowell Fairgrounds, which are no longer the fairgrounds, but out there near the river. And look at the number of telescopes, look at the number of people participating of all ages in this event out in Lowell in 1960. So that's kind of the first time we headed in that direction. This is one of the first of the newsletters. Those of us that have been in the organization really a long time can remember the mimeographed newsletters that were sent out by Harry V. Zebor. So whenever, and of course, all communication then, newsletters and things were not done by electronic means. They were done by the old U.S. mail and by telephone. And therefore, you could look forward to your monthly newsletter arriving in the mail from Harry Zebor, telling about some of the things that were going on. I call your attention to the program meeting for September. The final outdoor meeting for the session will be held on Observation Hill, opposite Richard Bennett's home at 3410 Bird Avenue Northeast. So this was going to be a star observing session, and it says 1 block west of the East Belt Drive, north of Bird Avenue. Kind of hold on to that thought. We're going to come back to it. Down below a little further, there's mention of Richard Ballamon. He was one of the printers, and he would print a lot of the material for the organization. Also one of the near charter members, and a very young man at the time. He's now in his 80s, but he was a member of the younger contingent in the Astronomy Club. There was not actually a student or junior section, but there were quite a number of younger people that did participate in the organization. And I call your attention to the section of the newsletter about the August meeting. During the August meeting, the eclipse of the moon was a great success. Among the group were 4 representatives, including 8 photographers from the Grand Rapids Press, A group of about 25 visitors from the Muskegon Club were among those present, and they had a private tour through the Grand Rapids Planetarium. President Hawkins, so Piercy is now president, estimates about 30 cars came to the site, bringing over 100 people. Well, there you go. That's the news of the day. And here's the group in the planetarium that came from Muskegon in August of 1961 to look at the planetarium, which looked a lot different than the planetarium that would follow it because it was the original projector, which proved unsatisfactory, and much to my chagrin that it was replaced. But that's part of the story a little bit later on. Notice anybody in there that you know? Here's Percy Hawkins' white head down here. This is Don Thompson over here. They were the hosts. Notice anybody, recognize anybody? Me? The geeky guy back here. I was just finishing up my first year at the University of Michigan. It was home for the summer. Reunited with my old friends from the Muskegon Astronomy Club, which I helped form in about 1916. And we all came over here at the invitation of Don Thompson. We saw the new planetarium, and then we went out and joined the group on Bird Hill. So after the visit to the planetarium, we went out to Bird Hill, and that's when I got an opportunity to meet Jim Marin, and also some of the other members of the Astronomy Association. I do remember it was a very, very nice eclipse of the moon. It was very nice and clear. And it was, of course, during the time when the moon was totally eclipsed, it was actually also quite dark. Well, not dark like that. Here's Bird Hill today. It's not far from Knapp's Corners. It was a dark site. Well, sort of dark. It was not that far from Grand Rapids, but it was a very convenient spot because it was not far from Richard Bennett's home and was a convenient field for the association. And so that's where we watched the eclipse, and that's where I got my first introduction to the Grand Rapids Amateur Astronomy Association. Outreach was an incredibly important part of the association's mission from the very beginning. And so there were star parties in parks, there were star parties at Bird Hill, there were people from the astronomy club that would go around and talk in the schools, and in general, the profile of the association was one of community involvement. I think that's an important message to carry taking forward. Now we enter the most amazing period in the history of the association, with the possible exception, yet to be proven, of the current era. Two key players in this, Jim Marin, a name you're going to hear again and again, who is now a growing leader in the organization, and Raymond B. Larson, one of the charter members, and also one of the moving forces behind the idea of an observatory. Of course, the original concept came from James C. Veen, and it was these two gentlemen and a number of others who really carried that vision forward. Now, in 1964, when I came to the planetarium as a young kid full of you-know-what and vinegar, one of the smart things I did was hire Jim Marin as a part-time presenter. He had, of course, a full-time job during the day, but on nights and weekends, he would present planetarium shows. And we got to be very good friends and talked a lot about the observatory and the possibility of an observatory. And then he hatched this idea to the board of the association. Build it on my property. There are representatives of the Marin family with us this evening, and I suspect you could remember times when your parents regretted that decision. However, it was that generosity, it was that gesture that made the observatory possible. And fittingly, Evelyn Marin, who just died here recently in January and who we'll have more to say about later, was the person who made this model of the observatory. And I'm happy to tell you it is secure and still exists, being maintained in the planetarium, maintained here in the museum under quality control. I got to watch where I put my fingers, folks. Okay, this is our view of the Marin property and adjacent property without all the woods that has developed around us, and with the observatory in place, of course, but this gives you some idea of where it is out in Kissing Rock Road. And I took that picture of the Kissing Rock, which is quite the classic, when I was leaving one day after a long day of work at the observatory. I was completely exhausted during the construction period, and I saw these two girls sitting on the Kissing Rock. I jumped out of the car and took that picture, and so there it is for posterity. We've gotten a lot of mileage out of that picture. And here's the groundbreaking, proof positive. I was there day one, but I'm not in the, yes, I'm in the groundbreaking, right next to Ray Larson. So here's Ray right here, me, a young man by the name of Tom Strack, one of the leaders of the junior group, which was growing simply because we were enlisting all these teenagers to help build the observatory. Another young man by the name of Charlie Vandenhoek, who was very, very active in the group and also worked here at the planetarium. Here's Dick Ballama. And another workhorse, a wonderful, wonderful young man by the name of George Sipnewski, just kind of the easiest going person you would ever meet, and somebody we could always rely on for a strong back. And we had to have strong backs because it's these kids that dug the holes, that laid the blocks, that carried the blocks, mixed the mortar. You've heard Tom Strickwerda tell the story, and you're going to hear it again in June, about how he started his whole career mixing mortar for the Veen Observatory as a kid. Oh, and speaking of Tom Strickwerda, here he is. You happen to know that we have a Strickwerda facility at the observatory, our new building, so obviously Tom was one of the main benefactors for that. Another Tom there, Tom Muller, busy digging. That's what they did every Saturday. We picked them up at 9 o'clock with trucks and cars and hauled them out there, and all day, and they dragged their tails out of there about 5 o'clock after a hard day of labor, and are very, very demanding straw bosses. And of course, lunchtime was always fun. Ray Larson would be good for a story or two. So here are the two Toms, and also Alex Myrodsky, another young man who played a big role in the building of the observatory. These are all pictures from the mid to late 60s. In fact, here we are at the end of 1966. We've already been over a year working on this project, and we have hardly anything showing above ground. It's mostly the basement area of the West Dome and the utility room as it exists now, the underground part of the observatory. Everything else was yet to be built, and we were already more than a year into the project. And this is the end of 1967, where we have just two domes, nothing on top of them, nothing between them. Typical work crew, Jim Marin, and some of the youngsters I've introduced you to. This young man is quite notable too. Bill Waronko went on to be a very successful member of the U.S. Navy and captain of a ship. When he was working with us, I was kind of wondering just whether he was going to be successful, but he certainly proved that he was. Interesting automobiles in those days. And the gentleman that I was pointing out to you there in the background contributed to the delinquency of miners. This young man by the name of Joe Schreerbut, I believe is his name, brought out a plentiful supply of elderberry wine. And that is the reason why everybody is smiling in this picture at the end of the day, including the kids. We never told their parents about that. Bob Bouvet, another important figure, he was president of the club during many of the years that the observatory was under construction. That's one reason if you're out on the North Trail and you sit down on the bench, you'll notice there's a plaque honoring Bob Bouvet, a very significant person in the history of the organization. He helped Ray Larson to grind the mirror for the original 12.5-inch reflecting telescope in the west dome of the observatory. And so here's Ray and Bob over the winter when we couldn't work on the hill. They were busy constructing the telescope. And meanwhile, the massive mount for that instrument, some of you remember it quite clearly, was being built in the machine shop of another one of our members, Roger Reed. And so here we are in the early spring of '68, and the 2 ash domes are being installed. We gained a big, big donation of about $10,000 over the winter. That was a lot of money in the '60s. And that allowed us to purchase 2 ash domes. Today, you would only be able to purchase about 1/4 of an ash dome for that amount of money. But that allowed us to have our 2 rotating domes in place, even though we had no roof over the main building between them. One of our longtime members that was involved in that, Ken Ward, came back tonight. He's here tonight. And he said he remembers working in the observatory as a kid in the late '60s, but wondered what was going to happen between the 2 domes because there was nothing between them. Well, eventually we were going to build a building between them. Here's looking up from where you now come out of the woods and make the turn on the road. There was no woods at that particular time along there. It was an open field. And a real good idea of how the observatory was at the beginning of 1968, which was an incredibly big year in the history of the organization. Because not only did we completely close in the Veen Observatory over that year, but as you'll see, there were a number of adjunct activities that we conducted as well. I don't know how we found the energy or the people power to do all of the things that we did. Another work crew, typical work crew during '68. Another person I haven't introduced you yet to is Sandy Karras down here. One of the few girls in the club. Boy, was she outnumbered. And believe me, there were a few of them that took notice of her too. They were of the age where that happens. And here are the 3 Rash boys. I think you're familiar with the Rash orchards out on the what we call the ridge out there where the fruit growing takes place northwest of GR. And they were all members of that family and had lots of resources that their parents supplied for us in the way of equipment and things to help in the building of the observatory. I was hoping that Vince would be here tonight. He still maintains his membership, one of the brothers. And again, I mentioned Bill Waronko. He was just a workhorse. Tremendously gifted young man and very, very, very humorous as well. The hottest day in August. Well, actually, I think this was earlier than August, probably about late June or July. And we, of course, did not have a roof on the building and we did not have the walls up, but we poured that big cement slab, that 20 by 40 foot slab that forms the floor of the observatory lecture room. And as you well know, when ready mixed concrete comes, they dump it and then you figure out what to do with it. And we had only one cement finisher and he arrived late. And believe me, it is very, very lucky to this day that the floor does not have a lot of undulations. He worked late into the night. We had tried to cobble together lights, anything that we could do to get the job done, to get a finished surface there by the time the sun set on this very momentous day. And I assure you there are a lot of very, very tired people. And then the block laying went. Now this, I was getting better at it. Now you can notice the blocks look pretty straight. And I was one of the chief block layers and straw bosses. I think, I I believe that's Roy Van Huysen. He's checking my work there on the ladder. And when I had to lay the blocks in a circle, they sometimes didn't work so good. And you can see evidence of that to this day. But when I got laying on a straight line, I got better at it. So I could have gotten my masonry's license if I had nothing else to do at this point in my life. And laying blocks was a very nice, relaxing diversion from my usual work. So I enjoyed it. And we were making progress. We could actually see it now, which was kind of nice. We had a roof raising after the laying of the last block, and that happened in, it says August, but I'm kind of inclined to think now it was probably July. I've kind of rethought that a little bit. Here's Jim and Evelyn Marin. Kevin Terrell, another one of the young people who did a very, very important part of work on the observatory. And Bob Moeller, who would become president following Bob Bouvet. And here's Mike Marin, somebody you know, I think, most of you. He's here in the audience tonight. And with her face hidden is Judy Moeller, who, of course, was very active in the club. She was Bob's wife. She also was our receptionist here at the planetarium, so I worked very closely with her for a number of years. And the roof raising all happened in one day. One day. The rafters were set. Lunch was had, watermelon, as you can see. Thousands of nails were pounded. That is Percy Hawkins, now in his 70s, up on a ladder, directing the operation. Need I say more about that remarkable fellow? Lunchtime, now that we got a roof on the building, here's Tom Strickwerda once again. That name will come up. George, the Rash Boys, Bob Bouvet, Percy Hawkins, among others. And then the telescopes went in. The 12.5-inch telescope, which had been prefabricated, was brought in sections to the site, was assembled. Here's a group after assembly that night. It was a big night. We brought the telescope out. It had no optics in it, but their tube and the mount were ready and they were working. And they worked really well for a couple of decades. Another figure joins the group here, two of them actually. Here is John Holmquist. He served, I believe, as secretary and treasurer, maybe even president at one point. Another important figure. And Andrew Fraser, a student at Grand Valley at this point, but another one of those young people along with Charlie here that were very, very active and fundamental in helping to give the organization a younger tilt in those days. Another one person I should mention, a couple of them actually, Don Cusin, and here is Joe Guston, who was vice president for a lot of years and who was very important in fabricating the mounting. He was a retired machinist and a very good one and played a part in the development of the mount. And Ellis Moore, he came to us in the 70s primarily, no, actually later 60s, but he was a really, really great tradesman. So he was great when we got to working on the interior. You can start to see some things looking more familiar now. And then our master plumber, Jim Marin. We always used to kid him about if he was good for nothing else, he was our plumber. Well, actually, he was good for a whole lot of things. He had a lot of talents, a lot of leadership ability. Well, we were inside now, so we could work in colder weather, yet we still did not have a heating plant. So this was some kind of a space heater that we were all gathered around. It made for great fellowship and camaraderie working in the winter and trying hard to get some of the interior work done in time for us to dedicate the observatory in 1970. Back to outside work in 1969. Notice Percy Hawkins up on the scaffold. I don't know how my OSHA people would think about our scaffolding and our safety issues there. We didn't really ask them about it. Once again, it's a wonder we didn't lose anybody. Get a load of that. Take a good look at those kids balancing on the ladders. These are kids. And introducing Jack McCarthy, who's in the audience tonight, and certainly one of the great pillars in this organization. Jack joined us in 1969 at age 14. We became friends, and I think we still are. And here is Joe Guston. Joe was a master of all trades, never served on the board, never served in an office. But if you needed somebody for a job, in whatever job it was, you could go to Joe and you could be assured that you'd get a positive response. And I'm happy to tell you that at our Christmas party in December, we established a new award in the GRAAA, and we call it the Joe Guston Award. And it's given to a person who has been in the organization at least 10 years, has never served on the board, but who is one of those workhorses, a Joe Guston. And I'm happy to say that both Mark Steiner and Greg Cummings, who received that award, are in the audience with us tonight. And we are now in a position that we'll be calling on you for many more things in the future. Back at the museum, not everything happened out at the observatory in the 60s. We had a panel discussion in 1968 on the subject of UFOs. And that was a hot subject because everybody was seeing UFOs. You know how that goes. You get a few reports of a UFO and then all of a sudden everybody's seeing them. You got a nice replay of that with the drones here a few months ago. Made good news every night about all the drone sightings. Where were they coming from? And of course, we needed a good panel discussion on the subject with various ideas. Jim Marin is always good for ideas. This is co-founder Evelyn Grable. And the young man speaking, I believe, is Charles Van Hook. Bill Reams here was from the Muskegon Astronomy Club. He was quite a UFO aficionado. And here's Dick Valema, now older version of Dick Valema. That was really a fun night. We had a big audience for that one, of course. And Andrew Fraser did a lot of presenting for classes. Boy, we would just get 20 or 30 kids on Saturdays for an astronomy class. Andy was a student at Grand Valley at the time, grew up in Muskegon. That's how we became friends. And we remain longtime friends. And he's going to be speaking to us in November by way of Zoom, because he's become quite an expert on Heber Curtis. He's done quite a study of Heber Curtis and his Michigan connections. And all on top of everything else, we ran a regional convention of the Astronomical League in 1968, in addition to all that work at the observatory. So talk about a golden era, that was it. Also, we saw coming in the 60s the publication called The Inside Orbit. It was initially a sort of project of some younger members in the early 60s, but we kept the name and kind of revived it as a bi-monthly journal, and that kept being published for years, at least twice a month or quarterly. And one of the last print versions came in 2006 in October, and it unfortunately contained an article about the passing of Bruce Seidel, who was one of the later fixtures in the organization. He would be a great candidate for the Ed Billick Award if he were alive today, because he didn't serve in the leadership, but he was just a workhorse and an ardent observer. Spent a lot of time out on Kissing Rock Hill with his own telescope hunting distant galaxies. In case you're interested, all of the printed copies of the Inside Orbit that we could round up are kept at the observatory. So if you want to find kind of something amusing sometime, just go out there and look through some of the back issues of all the print. We went to an all-digital version of it about 2015, obviously, and now it's largely a blog. Here is an interesting photograph because it not only features John Holmquist teaching a telescope making class, how to grind a mirror, how to polish it, how to test it, but two emerging leaders in the group, Dan Braybrook here and Mark Boyd. Mark was one of the speakers, you may recall, at our 50th anniversary celebration. Went on to become an executive, well, not an executive, but a chief engineer and product manager for General Mills in Minneapolis. Still lives in Minneapolis. I keep in constant touch with him. These guys were leaders in the group too, in part 3, the 70s. So here we are, the spring of 1970, nearly finished observatory. Pretty cool looking place, isn't it? All spiffed up in its coat of yellow paint. There was a period when we painted it blue. I don't know how that all came about. But eventually we decided, I think black and white works best. So that's why it is that way today, and that's why it's going to stay that way. But here we are, just prior to dedication. We now had 2 working telescopes, the 12.5-inch reflector, and in the East Dome, a privately owned 6-inch refractor, Jim Marin. One of the agreements we have with him is that he could put his own private telescope in the second dome. So it was primarily his private observatory, but it became anything but private over the years. He was so generous in letting other people use it that it eventually became mostly an observatory instrument. Some of the dignitaries that came up for the dedication on June 21st, after threatening of rain in the morning, it looked like it was going to be awful. And we've been planning this for weeks, sent out invitations, had all sorts of dignitaries coming, the mayor and the museum director. And among the guests was Donald Chaffee, father of the astronaut, and his wife Blanche. Here's Alvin Bohr, the father of the young man that we ended up naming the telescope after, who died in the Vietnam War. I think most of you know that story. And his wife, whose name is slipping my mind at the moment. It'll come in a dream. They were there, as well as a number of other dignitaries. This is quite an assembly here. And I want to call your attention to this gentleman right down here in the front row. That is Weldon Frankfurter, the longtime director of the Public Museum. There's a bench named in his honor out there near the entry of the observatory. And Frank gave us incredible support for this project. We used a lot of museum resources. We used a lot of museum vehicles. We used a lot of my time on this project to make it happen. And we owe a debt of gratitude to Frank Frankfurter here. There's Evelyn Grable, quite noticeable in her red. And there's a very younger version of Jerry Persha right there, our treasurer that moved to Arizona. And right next to him in the top hat, I do believe, if I am not mistaken, that is G.M. Ross. A slightly younger version. However, he hasn't changed a whole lot. And Mrs. Veen cut the ribbon, opening the observatory named in honor of her husband. Dr. Richard Teskey, who was a speaker at the 1968 convention and had spoken to the club previously, he was quite a friend of the club. He's a solar astronomer from the University of Michigan. We invited him to be dedication speaker, and he did a most fitting address, something that I still remember to this day. We do have it on tape, and I'm going to try to make sure I digitize that yet as part of my archive project. The last words of his speech, and I looked these up on the transcription, I believe that Veen Observatory will one day make significant contributions to the community and to the diffusion of scientific knowledge. Today, you are very proud, but I believe that there is more to come in which you will take pride. Quite a prophetic statement, I would say. Well, 1970s and the emergence of some new people, some of them very much still around with us. Bill Sanders, who is now head of computer engineering at Carnegie Mellon. Keith Snedeker, a well-known scholar in the history of astronomy. I think he lives out in the Salt Lake City area. And Mike Steele, who was one of the emerging junior leaders, and Dave DeBruyn, a fixture in this organization for a very long time, still a member. He looks a little older than he does in this picture. And we started our long period of public observing nights, individual use of the telescope, the original Bohr telescope, and so much tradition, so much, I know Ken was mentioning in an email to me how he remembers using this telescope, and is so happy that it still exists. It's now the Raymond B. Larson telescope, fittingly named after the person who ground the mirror and who was guided the early days of the construction of the Veen Observatory, and up at the Wessling Observatory north of Fremont. You can see it, yeah. It's all been reconditioned, and it's used for their public education programming. In addition, we started doing astrophotography, even limited research. Bob Montel, a very prominent member of our group, is here doing some careful observations. A variable star was actually confirmed. The existence of a variable star was actually confirmed here at this observatory under the direction of Bob Montel and along with collaborating with Bill Sanders. And of course, the tradition of public nights began. Public observing nights began in as early as the 1970s. I think we started them almost the first year that we were in business, and they continued. Group visits. All of the traditions that we have today continue. Let's divert briefly to talk about solar eclipse trips. In 1970, there was a club solar eclipse trip to the east where there was a total eclipse that went across the U.S. in March of 1970. Here's George Sepniewski, a professor from Grand Valley that supported us, Don Hall, Bob Moeller, Andy Fraser, now a college student. There's Jack McCarthy. There is Tom Strack. That's a name we want to pay attention to. He was one of the younger kids that helped build the observatory and still very, very active. Here's Bob Harrison, another fixture in that group. Terry Ryder, who I think is a former president. I don't know who the geeky guy is in the sunglasses. He's still around too. And here's a picture from 1973 when we went on an ocean liner cruise to the coast of Africa. Again, a lot of the mainstays in the organization. You might recognize Jack in there. Here's Mark Boyd, Bob Harrison. This is a slightly older version of that young man that was watching you lay blocks, Roy Van Huysen. And here we go, in the background. G.M. Ross, looking resplendent in his shades. I gave you a chance to say something, Gary. And we had, I think this is a 1974, if I'm correct. Look at the size of this group, a bus trip that went all the way down to Toledo for an astronomical symposium. We have the Marins in there, Jim and Evelyn. There's Evelyn. I think Jim's in there too. Yeah, Jim here. And right behind the bald head of Dave Hoffman, who was a president of the club during the, I think, late 70s. And a very, very interesting character indeed. Just a terrific character. Look at the young people and look at the numbers of them. That's what I find so amazing. We had such an active young division. Likewise here, a nice mix. This is at the McMath-Halbert Observatory in 1975. And once again, dominated by a lot of the youngsters. Bill Sanders is here, going on to great fame. And Dave DeBruyn over here, I believe. A few others. Again, I don't know who the geeky guy is. Here's Helen Dodson Prince, who was a longtime professor in solar astronomy at the University of Michigan and was our host. And then the Yerkes trips. There's been numerous Yerkes trips over the years. The observatory is a historic place near Williams Bay, Wisconsin. It's within about a 6-hour drive. And just an ornate, late 19th century building that at the time it was built housed the world's largest refracting telescope. To this day, that is the world's largest refracting telescope because it was the end of an era. No longer were they hanging pieces of glass at the end of the tube, but reflecting telescopes were becoming far more popular, where you put your glass at the base of the telescope and it becomes much more easy to manage. So this was sort of the last of the great refractors. It's been restored. It's now a historic place, and we've gone back again and again, kind of get the run of the place because I had some connections. I spent a summer there. I interned there when I was in grad school, and I got to know people. I had connections. A friend of mine who was a mentor at the University of Michigan arranged for that because he had already moved there and was on staff. He says, well, why don't you come up and join me for the summer? We'll put you to work. And I jumped at the idea and got to really know the place and the whole atmosphere, the mystique, the history, all of the great discoveries that happened here at this observatory that was part of the University of Chicago. This is a group from about the middle 80s, so we kind of jumped ahead here. But I did want to point out a couple of people. Jim Ashley, who spoke to us just recently, very accomplished planetary geologist. Jim was becoming active in the leadership of the organization. And I believe this is one of our presidents from the 80s. Bill, first name is Bill, and I'm losing the last name. It'll come to me in a dream. And a number of the young people that were active in the group in the 80s. And then our most recent trip, and you'll recognize some people here. Actually, you can recognize me now, because I'm getting old. Here's Kevin Bullerman. Here's Jim Ross. Bob Blau, who's still a member of the group. Ken Stewart over here. Greg, you're in there somewhere. Right there, I think. Yes. With your lovely wife, Jen. And I want to mention this gentleman right here. That is Mark Christensen, an optical expert with no rivals. He has an engineering degree, a PhD in electronics and optical engineering. He has given us innumerable good advice about our telescopes and how to fix them. Oh yeah, that's right. Thank you, Jerry, for sure. Joe McBride, our pretty ace photographer, and his large family over here on this side. We're also part of that group. There are many others in there, but these are some that stand out. I think also Nick Shook. Nick Shook's in the back here. Yeah. Where are you? Were you in there, friend? Good to have you with us tonight. In 1979, we had an eclipse watch. It was the last solar eclipse prior to 2017 that was visible in the United States. It was total across Montana and I think North Dakota, and that was about it in this country. And a few of our members flew up there and actually saw it. I did not. And we had a partial eclipse here, and look at the crowds on a clear February day in 1979. So moving on, and we only have a few slides here in these parts because we're getting to the more current era. You know more about that. Of course, Percy Hawkins, perhaps one of the most incredible figures in the organization. There are lots of people that have made wonderful contributions. Few people who are as beloved as Percy was. Just everybody was drawn to his personality and his humbleness. And so the youngsters that grew up in this organization were blessed by knowing him in the 60s, 70s, and even into the very first part of the 80s. Although, of course, by 1980, he was getting quite elderly. And when he died in 1982, I was privileged as part of my column to write a bit of a eulogy for him. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I think you can see that the first paragraph pretty well sums up what we thought of Percy. In fact, read the first two paragraphs. I think you can read it from back there. I don't have to read it for you. And note that he was a native of New Zealand. Came here in 1919. And of course, he was a manual arts teacher, which brought him close to people that were not highly motivated. And he would motivate them and turn them into very productive people. So he made a difference in many lives, in addition to the many kids from our group who knew him. And I know that in the comment periods that's going to come here in a few minutes, there will be people who will have things to say about Percy Hawkins. He was just a staple at our Saturday work sessions, telling us all sorts of cool stories. Some of them I don't know if I'd want to really tell you here. But they were educating young people in the ways of life. It is safe to say that Veen Observatory might not be a reality today were it not for Hawkins' dedicated contribution. And then the final paragraph, Hawkins often said he wanted to see Halley's Comet return in 1985, in vividly relating how he had seen it in his native New Zealand in 1910. He said it was one of the reasons for his great interest in astronomy. Well, unfortunately, he didn't make it to 1985. He died in 1982. And about 10 years later, we brought the first version of the Hawkins telescope to Kissing Rock Hill. Actually, at the dedication, we had none other than John Dobson as the speaker. John C. Dobson, the one and only, and what a character. And we said, please say something nice and fitting about how this Dobsonian telescope will be offered to generations to come and will be a great memory to Percy Hawkins. And instead, John Dobson spent the whole evening talking about his cosmological theories, which were not, shall we say, mainstream. So he's a pretty eccentric fellow. And we had several versions of it. One of them had the telescope sliding in and out of a permanent house. The first version, the one I showed you here, hang on just a minute. This version, the house actually was on wheels and it rolled over the telescope. So you had to put the telescope in a horizontal position, which is not good for Dobsonian telescopes. And then because of mirror sag, and then you had to carefully align the telescope so that it came over the house without causing damage. Well, the second version had the telescope being moved, which was not good for the telescope at all. Finally, we came up with this really incredible version that you see on the right, and which we still have today, where cleverly the house swings on a pivot. I'm not quite sure whose idea that was, but it's been copied by many, many others around the country and beyond. I'm not so sure the pivot was his part. He actually built the telescope. He and Dave DeBruyn are responsible for this marvelous instrument that many of us find as our favorite. It's such a fitting honor for Percy because he was the people's astronomer. And this is the people's telescope. This is a simple instrument, a basic Newtonian. No clock drive, no bells and whistles, no procedures you have to go through that are so complicated to put it to bed that you can mess it up. As long as you can do some straightforward mechanical things, you can use this telescope. So it's available to all. Interesting treasurer's report from the late 1983. Working funds, pretty much the entire treasury of the organization, was $547. That's in our petty cash today. Our operating budget for our observatory in our organization is roughly $40,000 a year. And we meet that through combination of our DOEs, our visitors' nights revenue, and the net worth of this organization, counting all of our investments, is well over $100,000. So we are positioned extremely well financially due to a lot of foresight of people that guided this organization. There was another eclipse trip in 1981, this on a ship off the coast of Africa. And now you see people looking a little more like they do today. Here's Bill Sanders again. Joe McBride, the back there. Young man who was leader of the junior group for quite a while, Mike Johnson. He was very active in the 90s. And also my colleague, Gary Tomlinson at the planetarium, longtime colleague for many, many, many years, among many others in that picture. And in 1994, when we opened the planetarium, actually we've had a number of really, really notable speakers over the years. We brought in people, astronauts, we brought in professors from various universities, our own alumni who are coming this year, and Jim Ashley, of course, from last year, who was with us in November, all people of high accomplishment that have been speakers or have participated in our as programs. Well, here Jack Lossman was a speaker for the rededication of the planetarium, and here he is with an informal grouping of our young people. Michelle Stark stands out here because she's gone on to be an astronomy professor. We've tried to get her as a speaker. We've been having some difficulties. And this was a picture that was taken the same day that we opened the new planetarium. In 1995, John Irwood was the president, and we had a celebration that year of the observatory, and I'm not quite sure the reasoning for it. It was the 40th anniversary of the club, so maybe that was the reason. And you know, from time to time I referred to Tom Strack, and I mentioned him in that previous pictures. Unfortunately, and a great leader in the organization, a just wonderful person, died of cancer in the mid-70s. And his family established an award. It was called the Tom Strack Award, primarily designed for young people in the organization who had done exemplary things over the years and who were standouts in the group. And here, along with Mrs. Strack, are 4 of them that received awards. One of the first awards, and the very first one, went to Dave DeRimo, I think also to Bill Sanders, who was not here for the associate for that particular event. Somebody you know well, I'm sure, David Staskevich, still very active in the organization. Michelle Stark, who was awarded that night, and also Andrew Harwood. And if you notice in the Blue Book, Andrew Harwood is going to be the Jim Marin lecturer in October. So we're looking forward to having him here. We made it a special effort this year to bring in people that have history with the club. Mike Murphy's in the audience tonight. He was president in the early 90s. Here's 3 presidents here. John Irwood in the mid-90s, late 80s, early 90s with Mike Murphy, still very active and alert, and I think he's still awake out there. And Kevin Young, who was longtime president around 2000 and into the 2000s. very significant contributor to this organization over quite a few years. And finally, just a few shots from things that you're familiar with. We updated the telescopes in 2000. And then in 2005, we added the robotic telescope, which one of these days is going to work. The Bohr 2 telescope. And hopefully, actually, we did have the robotic telescope working from the observatory library. And for a while, Jeff Dickerson had it working correctly from his office over in Lowell. I know because I was there one night when the Marin telescope woke itself up and the dome opened and there wasn't another soul around. So we know it, in theory, will work. It's just that we haven't got it in practice yet. But we're working on it. Don't give up on us. Part of the group that was there for the 2000 commemoration, which was the upgrade of the telescopes, the naming of the telescope, the Bohr 2 telescope, and also the introduction of the latest version of the Hawkins telescope. Here's a nice picture of Evelyn, Aaron. Will Millar, who was an instructor at community college, he was a longtime friend of the organization. I think this is Jim Farish. And the two Blooms, Paula and Joe Bloom. They were neighbors of the observatory. They lived down the road. A number of others, but I got to move on. Here's Jim Ashley. He had a little more hair in those days yet. He was there, I think, at the time he was still at Michigan State or somewhere. He hadn't moved out to Arizona yet, I don't think. Yeah, in 2000, he hadn't gone to Arizona yet. And there's Jake Borgeli at age 16. Dave Staskevich just sent me a text a little while ago telling me that a close collaborator of Jake's at the university or at Penn State just received a huge award. So even though Jake hasn't won his Nobel Prize yet, he's getting closer to it all the time. He's working with people who are winning big prizes. I would not be surprised to see him win a Nobel Prize. So get April 30th on your calendar right now. Don't let anything interfere. Back in this room to hear Jake Borgeli. He is probably one of our proudest young people. As an Eagle Scout project, he and his friends built those lights along the road leading up to the observatory. He got tired of running flashlights up and down the road on public nights so that people could see their way up. So he decided to do something about it. That's Jake. This was our last visit from Dick Teskey from the University of Michigan. He spoke at that event in 2000. Because he died probably, I think, about 12, he died around 2015 or so. So it was about 10, 15 years later. Just a treasured friend of the GRAAA. And then also at that event, Jack McCarthy, slightly older version, Kevin Terrell, Sandy Karras, remember that one girl with all those boys? And Bill Waronko, the kid I didn't think would do anything that became the Navy captain. And in the background, Craig Kirby, who was one of the co-builders of the latest version of the Hawkins telescope. That was the unveiling of the latest version of the Hawkins telescope, the one we use today, and that was in 2000. And then for the Marins in 2005, we named the robotic telescope after them, very, very fitting, the East Dome, which was originally supposedly Jim's private telescope, now our robotic telescope. And unfortunately, we lost Jim in March of 2018, I believe, and then Evie earlier this year. I am working on something for the InSight orbit in commemoration of Evie, and there will be a celebration of her life that will be on June 8th at the observatory. I believe everybody's invited. We got lots of room out there, and it'll be an outdoor event, we hope. Well, then, I think around, okay, what year was this, Gary? I tried to look it up. Do you remember the year? Well, I'm thinking around 2015. After a meeting one night, we surprised Gary with the presentation of a plaque. There'd been some maneuvering going on behind his back. He doesn't know about it. But because of his long dedication to amateur astronomy, and to more specifically serious amateur astronomy, making contributions to the American Association of Variable Stars over decades, still doing it to this day, if we could get him a working telescope. An asteroid was named after G.M. Ross. Is it asteroid G.M. Ross or is it asteroid Ross? Or don't you even remember? G.M. Ross. Asteroid G.M. Ross has a number. It's real. It's floating around out there. Well, you were very surprised. Yeah, you finally came to that realization, huh? I do ramble on, and I'm trying to get this thing done here. We had an outreach event. Well, we've had so many outreach events. If I got into that, we'd have another hour. All the comet watches. What we went through with Halley's Comet, when we had watches at 4 a.m. in the morning. And we had 1,000 people out. Here's the transit of Venus. This one conveniently low time in the afternoon, I think in 2012. And Greg Cummings was there, although I don't have the picture of him. That was in another picture. I have Kevin Bullerman, who's in the audience tonight, with his young, probably 7 or 8-year-old son, Noah, who is now a proud member of the U.S. Air Force. And we started our Saturday sessions at Schuler's Introductory Astronomy, which were quite successful. They were going along swimmingly, and then along comes COVID. And as a result of that, we had to curtail those. But you'll happy to see, if you look in your blue book, that they're back. And we have a series of beginning astronomy courses that we've been offering here this winter. And we'll continue to do that annually. In fact, if they're popular enough, we may actually add a couple. But we want to do things for beginners as well as for the more experienced astronomers. We continue having public nights. And there was a great reunion back probably about 2008 or so of the whole Veen clan. Quite a number of them. And I'm happy to say that Phil is here tonight. So greet Phil at the refreshments. I do believe that JC the third is in there too. I'm thinking back here, I'm not sure. But I want to make mention of him because he did a challenge grant of $40,000, I believe. It was a very healthy sum of money from the estate of J.C. Veen II, which we matched, which allowed us to buy the acreage from the Marins and to actually own 12 acres of property that we had been leasing for many, many, many years. That's enabled us to do all of the dramatic improvements that have come to Veen Observatory, including the trails. Interestingly enough, the trails are a work in progress. When we first cut the trails, this, which we call Junction Arch, at the intersection of the Ridge and South Trail, was not there. That tree fell, and it fell judiciously right across the arch, right across the entryway to the Ridge Trail to form what we call the Gateway Arch, or the Junction Arch. And we're going to get a similar plaque to some of the others that we have out there as soon as we find another Eagle Scout that wants to do a project. Rob Borst did a project, Eagle Project, for some of the signage that you'll find when you start hiking the trails again. Be sure to do that this spring. It's a wonderful, wonderful time of the year to enjoy this amenity that we have for all of our members. Don't need any training. Then we had a couple more eclipses, and I think that's about where we're going to line this up. 2017, Emily Romey, I had to get a picture of her in here because she has done more for this organization to promote, to enhance our membership, to up our profile, all because she's such a talented artist, graphics person, and just an all-around wonderful person. And she created this sign for the group that went to Nebraska in 2017. It was a pretty substantial group, and here I am with the sign, and my dear friend Donna, my longtime significant other, the Borgelli family, all with the sign, including Jake on the right before he sprouted this big beard. You'll see that in a second. And then finally, just a few pictures from our 50th anniversary delayed by 1 year. We had the 50th anniversary of Veen Observatory in 2020. It was supposed to be a big outdoor celebration, complete with a tent, and lunches, and speakers, and reminiscent, and it was all going to be up on the hill. The forecast became more ominous by the day. We got closer. Well, long-range forecasts are always wrong, right? Well, this one happened to be right. The meteorologist was talking about the biggest rain in years, all weekend, on the 27th of June, 2021. What to do? Thank goodness that little church on Snow Avenue came to our rescue. We moved all of it inside. We took over the church. We had our lunches. We had, as you can see, a substantial turnout. We had some wonderful speeches. It's all on YouTube, by the way. You can go, if you did not attend that and you don't want to know what happened at our 50th anniversary for Veen Observatory, by all means, take an hour or two and watch that because it's so revealing. We had these great speakers, including Jake Borgelli, also Mark Boyd and Tom Strickwerda. I got a picture here, I think, of. There's Jake and his father. Now he's looking more professorial now, as you know. He's moved to Penn State. He's assistant professor at Penn State. Here's Jack Dulesky, who came to Grand Rapids just before COVID to take over the directorship of the planetarium. Happily, Jack is a little more relaxed these days. He got through that, and great things are happening. Mark Boyd in the middle, a much more mature version than that kid that was in the mirror grinding class. Tom Strickwerda, who I told you about, and who has become a benefactor and has an amazing resume as a engineer in the space program. He'll be with us in June, date to be announced. And the latest recipient of the Strack Award, a fitting honor to our president, Chris Miller. Right next to him, the most recent recipient of the award, no surprise, Jake Borgelli, along with Dave Staskevich and Andrew Harwood, former recipients. And then finally, the eclipse, the most recent one, the partial eclipse, substantial partial eclipse on the Blue Bridge. Big crowd. I wasn't there. In fact, just about everybody on Jack Dulesky's staff deserted him. So he was there, along with some good volunteers from the GRAAA who were not traveling in totality, the few. And here are the many who were with us in Arkansas. Wonderful group picture there. This is Sarah Flynn, one of the meteorologists at WOD. She came along with a camera crew and they broadcast the whole thing. We had a great meteorology team, not only recently retired George Lessons from WZZM, but meteorologist emeritus Bill Steffen from WOD, their wives. Here's Emily hamming it up, as usual. I had to sit down. I'm getting old. And Andrew Gardner, who's our tech tonight. Dick Shook, Dave Staskevich, Dave DeRemo. Another person who was very active in the group for years, who came with us from all the way from North Carolina, Mike Kissinger, and many others. It was quite a group. Oh, our president, don't forget him. He's in there somewhere, right there, Chris Miller. Oh, along with Nova. Nova goes everywhere. Amazing things coming to Veen Observatory. Already there are the strict word of building. Will be in full operation this year. Just give us a little opportunity to get the bugs out. A new mount for the Bohr telescope, which you'll see shortly when we get it up and running here in the next few weeks. The McCarthy Pavilion, which is just such a versatile facility where we can have all sorts of events. The Starbecue. We had an art prize event. They were supposed to look through the telescopes. It was cloudy, but that did not prevent everybody from having wine around the campfire, then having more wine around the campfire, and then telling stories, and then telling louder and louder stories. And it was a wonderful evening. They enjoyed it despite the fact they never saw a star. It shows the versatility of the place. We can do all sorts of things. It's a great picture. I think Wes Johnson, who's in the audience tonight, one of our rising stars in the young people in the group, he was there along with Sam Sherman on the left there. They were hosting a group from Belding High School. Two high school kids hosting a group of high school kids that were mostly girls. And I think Jill Johnson and I and the teacher were down below, and we were just kind of overhearing what was going on up in the dome. And we do think some education was going on, but these kids were having a very good time. And that's what it's all about out at Veen Observatory. You can tell by the smiles. This place and this organization means so much to so many. Another of our rising stars is Eli Schaub. He's observing from the Strack facility with our new Lunt solar telescope. That's in full operation now, and we'll be back online here in the spring. We'll be having regular solar observing. The Starbecue comes every year in June. Check your blue book for the date. I think it's on the actual 21st of June this year. And Tom Strickwerda might be back to tell us some more stories about his wonderful career. Banjo Jim, we can count on him to entertain. And the storytelling group, check that in the blue book. Tom Good and his Riverside Rencontours will be with us again this summer with the regular last Friday of the month storytelling sessions on Fridays. We've strengthened our association with the Grand Rapids Public Museum. We think that that's going to be something that will serve us very, very well in the future. We now have a 5-year agreement. The museum supports us financially. They allow us to use this facility, normally a $500 rental, for free. And they support us in so many ways. And all we do in return is allow their members to come free to our public nights. I think that's a really, really good deal. And I ardently, as Tom mentioned, one of my chief goals throughout my whole career was to strengthen the relationship between the museum and the Astronomy Association. And it's going to get even better because there's going to be a new community access to the archive building, which is over where the old museum is and where I have my office. It's lots of parking. And on nights when we don't have big programs where we need this larger facility, or if we're not in the planetarium, we'll be able to meet over there, and it'll be very, very convenient. You won't have to go right downtown, lots of parking, easy access, kind of like the old Schuler days. We'll even have room for our refreshments, which are coming up in just a few minutes after a few stories from people. One of the main projects we're doing right now is what we call a glowing walkway. When Jack McCarthy, Mark Boyd, and I were out at Lowell Observatory a little over a year ago, we saw this amazing path with glow rocks that captured daylight sunshine and then glowed very, very subtly at night. So it allowed you to define the walkway between the various facilities. Well, we got the idea that that would be wonderful at Veen. Everything that you see in blue there represents where that glowing walkway is going to be. The only problem was raising about $25,000 to construct the walkway. Thanks to the work of Mark Daneman and others, we solicited the Lowell Cable TV Foundation. They have awarded us $11,000 toward the project. And I am very happy to end the program by showing you the following email that I received yesterday. So, the glowing walkway will be coming very soon. And we're going to pass the mic around for questions. Keep your questions and your comments succinct, please. As I look out over the audience, that's a pretty good turnout for this, and I'm so glad that you came. I hope you found it worthwhile to take this walk down memory lane with me. It was one of the funnest things I've ever done in all the programs I've done for this organization over the years, is to put this together. And it's actually a year-long project. I'm going through a lot of archival material, organizing it, putting it in places where it's climate controlled at the museum, where it will be available to all of you or anybody that wants to do research about the GRAAA. You'll be able to come here and do that. I just feel I need to do this project because I'm now the person that's probably been with the organization the longest, and I feel an obligation to leave it for those who come after. Who would like to make some additional comments?
I've been with.
Yeah, I remember you when you were a smart
since
aleck
I was.
kid.
I've known David since I was 13. I got brought down to the old Chaffee Planetarium for a viewing of 2001: A Space Odyssey, which I really wanted to see. They managed to get a copy of it, and they presented that. My father was there. We watched it. It was, of course, fantastic. I have to say that I've been prodded by David my whole life to become a better human and learn and be curious. And I am profoundly grateful to you in more ways than I can speak or convey for your mentorship throughout my life. I've passed a great deal of what I have learned from David to my son, and I can't say enough about this organization and the man who, let's just say, if not in spirit, you've been the spirit of this organization.
It's been my pleasure, Kevin, to know you. Thank you.
When in doubt, do as the Prime Minister does. I saw the newspaper article up on the screen about how Percy Hawkins was 50 years into astronomy. The date was 1959. So let's do some simple arithmetic. Apparently, he became involved in astronomy as a very young man, a boy, in New Zealand. Now, what the article failed to mention, and I could kick myself around a block or two for not cultivating his friendship more completely, is that he enlisted in the Great War amongst Empires. And by my estimation, in 1914, he crossed the Pacific as a common soldier, and they had to go around Cape Horn because the Panama Canal was closed to belligerent powers, and went all the way to Europe. And I don't know anything about his service record, but he was just a boy, as so many of them were in the Great War. And I believe, Dave, can you help me with this, that he made friends with Americans over there, and that's how he came to the United States. So between his service in Europe and his coming to Grand Rapids is a great blank. And it's unfortunate that none of us, including me, the historian, the man of the mind, never bothered to take notes about such a remarkable life. And he did not go back to New Zealand, I believe, Dave, was it 1970 or 71? Right? Something. Percy Hawkins built that observatory. The rest of us, and I was a very minor player, were his workers. But he was a real leader, along with Jim Marin, Larson, and DeBruyn. We would not have what we have today if it weren't for Percy S. Hawkins.
Agreed.
I'm
Aubrey.
Aubrey Marin. I just want to add one thing to what Gary just said. Percy told me that after the war, he decided to take a long route back home to New Zealand. And when he got to America, he met Veen and decided to stay, his wife. But, yeah. Oh, yeah, and oh, wasn't she a sweetheart? Yeah, I can understand why he'd fall in love with her and stay here, even though I hear New Zealand is very nice. But I just wanted to add to what you said there. She was. They were both very sweet and such good friends to our family, and yeah.
There couldn't have been a better mentor for the kids. than
Oh,
Percy.
no. And I remember Percy jumping around on those roof
Oh, my
beams. I mean, yeah.
Veen had to remind me one time when I got after him to come out for a work meeting. She says, keep in mind he's almost 80 years old. So
I know,
she
but-
lectured me a little bit on that.
Yeah, he sure didn't
But
lose
he
any
didn't
energy.
show that.
Yeah.
But when she died, then things changed rather
Yeah.
rapidly, and
Yeah,
it
that
didn't
was
last
very.
a long time after that.
Mhm.
So it was definitely a marriage made in heaven.
Oh, absolutely. They were such a great couple.
Jack, there's somebody who's been around a while.
Yeah, I think that's a good thing. A couple of things. Percy Hawkins, we've heard mentioned several times, and very appropriately so. Dave said that he had some things that he shared with adults and kids. Some he would mention, some he wouldn't. And I'll just throw out the story. I won't get into detail, but the title of the story was The Height of Folly. And he would
No.
explain that, but I won't. For me, as a young person, I think somebody said they started when they were 13, I think. I think I was 14. And one of the things that didn't get mentioned, but I think is really was a neat part of the organization, was that we had a junior division, a part of the organization, but yet separate. We had our own officers. I was vice president and also president at one time, and Sandy Karras and Kevin Terrell and Bill Ronco were all leaders in that. We published our own newsletter. I don't know if it was monthly, but it was at least quarterly. And it gave us experience. It gave us a chance to learn organization and leadership and public relations and human relations. And I attribute a lot to the success I've had in my career, and many, many other young people, to having been given that opportunity to participate in an organization like that. And I know Kevin mentioned Dave as one of a key leader in the organization, and he certainly has been. I talked about that at the 50th anniversary of the Observatory, how important he's been to all of the young folks that have grown up in the organization. Two other just quick things. Gary Ross, I was a 14-year-old kid, and I can remember this really different person showing up at the observatory with vests and ties and hats and canes and things like that. And as a youngster, it was I don't want to say scary, but it was sort of a person I wasn't quite sure. It was never impolite or anything like that. But over the years, I've come to get to know Gary and appreciate the knowledge he has and the experience he has. And today I can certainly call him a friend. And last story about Dave. Now, I counted in the presentation that Dave talked about his age at least 4 times. Okay, well, I lost track. That's why I rely on Gary for details. But as a 14-year-old kid, and probably a few years after that, so Dave would have been in his late 20s perhaps, I have a very clear recollection. I went on the 1970 eclipse trip down to Georgia, and I can remember Dave saying, well, I'm sort of an older person. I've got to sort of take my time, and I can't quite keep up with everything. And my goodness, the man talked about his age when he was 28, and here he is in his early 80s, and he is still going and going, and still a leader, mid-80s. But he has talked about that, and he's used that as a crux for so many years. But now he really is old, and he deserves that. So anyway, thank you.
Believe me, that's the reason I'm sitting. I don't want to fall off the stage.
I'm Randy Mergener. I'm a little bit later coming along to the club. I was 1984.
What a pillar, Randy. You're a pillar.
1984. So one of the first things I remember was the eclipse in May of '84 on the Monroe Mall.
The annular eclipse.
The annular eclipse we set up there, and that's where I met Mark Boyd, and I think I met Jack probably about that time too, and Bob and them. But anyway, that was one of the first things. I remember the open houses. But the one thing I really remember most was the Yule burns. For those, that was at Gary's house just before Christmas. We'd have the Yule burns and stuff. That was a tradition for a number of years. So that was one of the, that's where I really got to know Gary and that.
I threw up on the floor of my own bedroom with the bed.
And we were all still partying.
Yes.
That's one of the traditions I elected not to include.
Yeah, I noticed you didn't include that one. There he is. Oh, you want to take it? Sure. Yeah.
Hello, everybody. My name is Kurt Blakesley, and I'm a pretty recent member of GRAAA, but I've been really enjoying myself coming to these meetings and getting more ingrained in the organization. I accepted an offer from Mr. DeBruyn to join the board after only having been a dues-paying member for a few months. But I've had a lifelong interest in astronomy, and I really wish my parents had known an organization like this existed for, longer than I've been alive. So I have a daughter now. I'm very excited to raise a kid knowing that things like this are out here, and that we have such a fun organization with such a storied past. You can talk to anybody at any of these meetings, and they're all just such kind people. So yeah, I've just really come to love this organization, even though I haven't been in it for nearly as long as I wish I have been or had been. But yeah, I just kind of wanted to chime in here and say how much I appreciate the GRAAA. I did also have one question. We saw a lot of cool photos from decades past here of the building of the Veen Observatory. And I noticed when the bricks of the towers were going up, it was just perfectly round. But then you cut to maybe the 90s or something, and I noticed the gargoyle is now there. When was the gargoyle added, and by whom,
I'm
and
not
for what?
exactly
Yes, a gargoyle on each of the towers, right?
I'm not
Yeah.
exactly sure when, but I know it was Craig Freeby
Ah.
who felt we had to have a gargoyle.
Well, yeah, I'm so glad they're there. I mean, they're such a fantastic detail of the Veen. So
Yeah, and
yeah,
they get a lot of
it's
comments.
they're
do.
gorgeous, and so I'm glad they showed up, and I'm glad they've stuck around. Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
Mike will make you the last one.
Always the last. Well,
Let's save the best for last.
I've been gone for 46 years, so most of you don't know me, unless you've come to the observatory in the last 2 years, where I've been showing meteorites in my collection in the basement. But I also wanted to say that I have to do an ad right now. We have my father's movies, Murder at the Observatory and Aliens at the Observatory. And I'd like to start selling them at the memorial for my mother on June 8th at the Observatory. So bring some money and I'll set you up with some really awful movies. DVD. I have a friend who built himself his own planetarium in his front yard in Arizona, where I live nowadays. And he enjoyed the movies, and he took it from the VHS and put it on DVDs. He made his money off of some indie movies, one of which made enough money that he could afford his own planetarium, 30-footer. Very similar from the 60s to Dave's first planetarium here at the museum.
That was a 30-footer.
Yes.
Pretty cramped quarters.
Yeah. You had some tricks where you went out besides the 30-foot dome that he didn't know about. But I would like to admit to a prank that we pulled on you back in '64.
You pulled it on me?
Well, on the observatory. The neighbor kid, Mike Talbot, who Aubrey knows very well too, had an old book, 100-year-old, with a blank page, and he wrote, "Farmer Green's treasure is buried nearby." And while I was digging the dome, I made sure that it was found in '64 or '65. And at one of the Yule burns 30 years later, I discovered that Ray Larson was still looking for that treasure after 30 years. Yes, what?
The Earth was not turned until June or July of '65.
Oh, '65, okay. And I just wanted to admit to a prank that we had done and admitted to Ray while he was still alive.
See you at the refreshment.